بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Welcome back everyone to another lecture. We are now in the chapter of hunting and slaughtering, and in today's lecture we will kind of backtrack just a little bit, like take the portion in the beginning, and we're going to talk about. There are two scenarios we're going to talk about. One scenario is that you are able to slaughter the animal, meaning you are able to hold the animal, capture the animal, etc. And then there's an animal that is not possible to slaughter in that way. How does one deal with that? Like if your animal, one of the examples that they give is your, goat fell in a well, or well, you can't go down and get it. I mean, how do you then deal with that situation? Then we're going to talk about the complete ways of slaughtering the animal, the throat and the esophagus, and then the issue of the veins, the jugular veins, and then what suffices of those. And then following that, we will enter into the section on hunting. And when we talk about hunting, we're going to talk about hunting using trained animals, and actually in a lot of the Hawashi, they talk about using firearms, bullets and rifles and things like that. So we're going to talk about those type of situations. And obviously in hunting, the default in the classical discussion will be hunting with an animal. So what are the conditions for the animal to be a proper hunting animal? There are four conditions that we're going to talk about. And then we will then conclude by talking about the implement. What kind of instrument or implement or tool can you use to slaughter the animal? Then we will begin the next set of discussion points, which is who has the right to slaughter an animal, and depending on that person's faith, can we eat that food, can we eat that animal or not? I don't think we'll get far into that, but I'll just mention it because it's the following section. So those are the main points for today's lecture. I think this is going to be pretty standard. Maybe a lot of this you've know just by default. I don't think there's anything surprising. And inshallah, we'll begin the discussion in the next clip. All right, we begin the way we always begin, by turning directly to the text, the original text of Abi Shuja radiallahu anhu. قال المصنف رحمه الله ونفعنا بعلومه في الدارين آمين كتاب الصيد والذبائح وما قدر على ذكاته فذكاته في حلقه ولبته وما لم يقدر على ذكاته فذكاته عقره حيث قدر عليه. وكمال الذكاة أربعة أشياء: قطع الحلقوم والمريء والودجين، والمجزئ منهما شيئان: قطع الحلقوم والمرئي. ويجوز الاصطياد بكل جارحة معلمة من السباع ومن الجوارح. وشرائط تعليمها أربعة: أن تكون إذا أرسلت استرسلت، وإذا زجرت انزجرت، وإذا قتلت صيدا لم تأكل منه شيئا، وأن يتكرر ذلك منها، فإن عدمت إحدى الشرائط لم يحل ما أخذته إلا أن يدرك حيا فيذكى. وتجوز الذكاة بكل ما يجرح إلا بالسن والظفر. وتحل ذكاة كل مسلم وكتابه. Okay, so Abu Shuja says, radiallahu anhu, may Allah have mercy on him, and may we benefit from his knowledge in this world and the next. The chapter on hunting and slaughtering. Slaughtering, when possible, an animal is slaughtered by cutting its throat or at the base of the neck. An animal which is not possible to slaughter, as mentioned above, is slaughtered by wounding it, however one, until it dies. The complete way of slaughtering is to cut four things: the throat, the esophagus, and both the jugular veins. Both the jugular veins being number 3 and 4. What suffices is cutting two things: the throat and the esophagus. So that's what's the essential part. And then hunting. It is permissible to hunt using all types of trained predatory land animals and predatory birds. There are four conditions for the animals being trained. When it is sent, it goes. When it is told to stop, it stops. If it kills the prey, it eats nothing from it, and it does the above repeatedly. If one of the above conditions is missing, its prey is not permissible to eat unless it is alive when the human takes it and it is slaughtered. And as far as the implement, it is permissible to slaughter using any implement that draws blood except from teeth and fingernails. And then animals slaughtered by all Muslims and people of the book are lawful. It's probably as far as I'll get into the next section. All right. Now, before we get into the commentary, we'll get the dalil or the adillah. One of the main verses that talks about the halal and the haram of the foods is Ma'idah verses 3 حرمت عليكم الميتة والدم ولحم الخنزير والمنخنقة عفوا ولحم الخنزير ما أهل لغير الله به والمنخنقة والموقوذة والمتردية إلى آخره, to the end of the verse. Those are all of the haram things, something that is killed or strangled, etc., hit until it dies, etc. So for us, the key is to slaughter the animal. وَإِذَا حَلَلْتُمْ فَاصْطَادُوا, we talked about that in Ma'idah verse 2. Once you undo the ihram state, then you can hunt. So that talks about hunting. And a lot of these rules, by the way, will also be found in other fiqh books in the chapter of Hajj and Umrah. And as a matter of fact, now that I'm on that topic, Imam al-Nawawi's book on Hajj, he has a book on the Manasik al-Hajj, which is, I think, one of the greatest, most useful books I've ever read in my life, because I took it with me on Hajj and it was like play by play. I mean, it was an amazingly useful book. There's a nice discussion there also on the rules of slaughtering, because slaughtering is a part of the Hajj, so therefore a lot of the fiqh books talk about it there. Not in this case. In this case, we have its own chapter. The Prophet ﷺ said, as is narrated in Ad-Dar al-Qutni, ألا إن ذكاة في الحلق واللبة, that to cut the throat, as we will, esophagus and the windpipe, whatever, as we will come and talk about shortly. Okay. Sorry, I was just reading this hadith. Okay. As far as the hunting, this is from Ma'idah verse 4. يسألونك ماذا أحل لهم قل أحل لكم الطيبات وما علمتم من الجوارح مكلبين تعلمونهن مما علمكم الله. So they ask you what is permissible. So it talks about the food, the animals that are hunted by way of the hunting animals is permissible. So that's one of the main verses that talks about that. As far as the conditions of the hunting animal, this comes in Bukhari and Muslim from Uday ibn Hatim radiallahu anhu, that the Prophet ﷺ says, إذا أرسلت كلبك The 4 conditions come from that hadith. You send the animal, it goes, you ask it to come, it comes, it doesn't eat. That's mentioned in the hadith. And then not using bone or fingernails as an implement. This comes from the hadith. He says it's previously mentioned, and I can't find that hadith. Okay, maybe it will come in the hashiyah. Okay, sorry, that was not a very well organized presentation of the adillah. I apologize for that, but let's pick up the hashiyah, and then inshallah this will be more clear by the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay. So we talked in the previous lecture about the importance, like why is there even like a section like this in Islamic law? We talked about the importance of the food being halal. And then we talked about the basic slaughter. But as is my as is my style, sometimes I backtrack just so we can take the whole section as one complete thought. So minus those like introductory remarks, let's just jump in as if we're reading the section from the beginning. When it is possible, an animal is slaughtered by cutting its throat or the base of the neck. So this is the normal default scenario that we have an animal that we're trying to slaughter so that we can eat it, or it's slaughtered and we're going to donate the meat as a qurban or something like that. So you're going to cut the throat or at the base of the neck. Usually it's cut this way. It's usually not cut that way. That's considered makruh, disliked. So usually it's cut that way. And the people that do this, they kind of do it for a living, are experts, and they have the implements to do that. And in cutting it, as he will say, in cutting the throat, we're looking to cut the throat and the esophagus. So both the gullet and the esophagus, I think that's what it's called. That's the bare minimum. That they are severed, and then that the blood be allowed to come out. And then he says an animal which is not possible to slaughter, as mentioned above, meaning that the animal, we have no physical way of grabbing it, holding it. So think of the example I gave in the introductory clip, that the animal fell in a well. Therefore, how are you supposed to slaughter it? Or it's like running around and there's a big chasm between you and the animal. I mean, you can think of a scenario. That's what he means by it's not possible. It means that there's a physical obstruction from you being able to. How do you slaughter it? It's slaughtered by wounding it however one can until it dies. If you can wound it and then go to it and slaughter it by cutting the neck, that would be optimal. But if you can't, sometimes it's even impossible, then you wound it such that it dies, and then that would render it permissible to eat. It would be considered halal to eat. Now, in that, this is obviously not the more popular scenario. So there are some discussions in the fiqh about those scenarios. And because I'm running out of the time I can see on my timer, let me pick it up in the next clip, inshallah. Okay, so we were talking about the line, if an animal is not possible. I just want to get the hashia going. If it's not possible to do the first scenario, okay, so in that scenario, it needs to die from the injury. Let me just state it that way. That would be easier. So, if like an animal, this is going to sound like very silly, but if you injured and I'm not a hunter, so you can tell by I'm kind of stuttering because I'm kind of grasping at a scenario. If you injured an animal, let's say the animal's in a well and they're like steps in a well, and you injured the animal. I'm just totally making this up. And you injure the animal, and then the animal falls in the water, and then dies. You couldn't eat it. It would be considered haram because most likely it died through drowning, not through the injury. So, or if you threw, or if there was a scenario in, well, let me leave it. I don't want to get too messy. Let's leave it at that scenario. So it dies through that injury, then it would be halal. Okay, the complete way of slaughtering is to cut 4 things: the throat and the esophagus, and then the 2 jugular veins. But the 2 jugular veins is a sunnah. My experience, which is very, very limited, is that usually they do all 4 because it becomes easier. Now, when we talk about the act of slaughtering, one of the things that comes up in the fiqh books, let me just get the wording out for you, is the movement of the animal. When you slaughter an animal and the soul is coming out of the animal moves. That type of movement is expected, and that's a sign that you have successfully slaughtered the animal. So when he says that this is the way you slaughter the animal, you have to sever, you have to get to the point of the involuntary movement produced by the soul leaving the body from the first strike. You can't do multiple strikes, swipes to get to that stage. That though, if you have to do a second and third time, then that would be considered haram. The food we consider haram. Now, if like the knife slipped or it was a little bit harder and you had to do it again, or the knife slipped from your hand and you quickly grabbed it, those wouldn't be considered a second time. That's all considered part of the one time. So you just swipe it open, and then in that you cut. That's why the animal's kind of like somebody's holding the neck like this and the body down so that it's very clear. I mean, it's a very it's people that know how to do it. I don't know how to do it, but I've seen it done, alhamdulillah, a few times. So they can cut it quickly. That's what's important. If there is movement of the animal called al-haya al-mustaqirra, the movement that I just mentioned was called hayat al-mustamirra, continual life, continual, or you can translate it as involuntary movement. That's expected. Al-haya al-mustaqirra, the independent, voluntary motion. Some of the fuqaha describe it that if you just like kind of injured the animal, it probably could survive for a day. That means you haven't done anything. You've just injured it, and then therefore you're on the way to producing a killed animal rather than a slaughtered animal. So this is something that you will find. It's one of those things that's very, very fine. It might be like a sentence or half a sentence, but when you get into the larger books of fiqh in this section, in our madhab, it will talk about that, and it's very important that you at least hear from me those terms so you can kind of like be on the lookout for it. On that, let me just show you something that's kind of neat in some of the way that the modern fiqh books are published. I mean, this is the version of the Haishit al-Bayjuri that I use, but you will see al-Haya al-Mustaqirra and al-Mustamirra here, but they're in red. So sometimes in the modern printings of the book, they'll put the red or highlight these type of terms in red in a different color, and that's very useful because your eyes can have it. And there is a precedence for that. I know I'm going on a tangent, but whatever. We have some time. This is kind of a slow class, a slow lecture. If you look at manuscripts or images of manuscripts, the ulama wrote in different colors, sometimes for this reason. Not necessarily they highlighted vocabulary or concepts, but the chapter headings, book headings, you'll find them used in different, like al-fasl will be like in a different color, or the basmala will be a different color, and there are illuminations to the pages. So the Salaf, that's how they wrote, and in the modern printing, I'm happy that they've revived some of that. Anyway, so those are some of the things that will come up in that section. Now, of course, when we talk about slaughtering in the way that he mentioned, there's a lot of sunnahs involved. This is just like the basic thing. But the sunnah is that the animal facing the qibla, the sunnah is to say this tasmeen, Bismillah, Allahu Akbar. We talked about that a little bit in the last lecture. The sunnah is that you treat the animal nicely, well, with rahmah. The sunnah is that the knife is super sharp, and the reason that it's just kind of a one-go thing is that you want to have ease, and the reason why it's disliked to cut from the top is that it's more pain because there's more distance between here. The things that you need to cut are right here. So if you go from the top to here, it's longer. So there's going to be more pain inflicted. When you go like this, it's just like kind of like a pinch, and then the involuntary movements that you see from the animal, it's not because the animal's in pain, it's just because the soul is leaving the body. So those are all sunnahs. Now the tasmiyah for us is sunnah. I think I mentioned that in the previous lecture, and it's not a fard as it is in the Hanafi school, and that is why for us as Shafi'is we're more flexible. For example, we can eat kosher foods because the tasmiyah is not a part of it. As long as the animals, as we will see in tomorrow's lecture, as long as the animal's not slaughtered for other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or for like some deity or something like that, then you're okay. Now you might laugh, but as the world becomes kind of increasingly together, you will come across people that they have slaughtered foods for different deities and different high holidays for their traditions or special occasions, and so these things do still exist. It's not like they don't exist, not so prevalent, but they do exist. Anyway, so the tasmiyah for us is just a sunnah. I mean, I've never seen anyone slaughter the animal and not do the tasmiyah, but I'm just saying it's important to understand that it's a sunnah, so that therefore we could eat the food of the Jews, specifically the kosher, food, because you can't come and say, well, they didn't say the tasmiyah. Okay, so let me just repeat that. The cutting, a complete way of slaughtering is to cut four things: the throat, esophagus, and the both jugular veins. Typically, that's what happens. And we said that we cut it from the front to the back with one swipe as much as possible. If there's not one swipe and they have to do two or three, it renders the animal not halal to eat. And therefore, but if there's like a stumbling, or in the beginning there's like a stutter step or something, as we kind of say, then that's okay. That's considered the one type of cut. And in the movement of the animal, as the soul is leaving the animal, we differentiate between the voluntary movement and the involuntary movement. Once the things are severed, and the by the way, the throat and the esophagus have to completely be severed, not partially severed. So if you partially sever it, and then you have to go a second time, that makes it haram. So by the one and two cut, the demarcation of that, I should have mentioned this, and I apologize earlier. The demarcation is that the both of the tubes are completely severed. You also don't sever the head, so that's also a mistake, and that's haram to do that. So the head is still attached, kind of. Those are severed. The blood is kind of squirting out, and then once it settles down and the blood flow ceases and there's no more involuntary movement, then you complete the process of skinning it, severing it, skinning it, and getting the meat ready. But that's how the initial part begins, and then what suffices is cutting the two things: the throat and the esophagus. Okay, as we wind down this lecture, let me just see if there's anything. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad. Yeah. Okay, now so that's the slaughtering of the animal that we are able to slaughter properly, slaughtering of the animal that we can't slaughter properly because there's some kind of weird circumstance that's happened. Now we talked about the slaughtering. Now the next thing to talk about is hunting. So it is permissible to hunt using all types of trained predatory land animals and predatory birds. And this is a very good translation of the Arabic text. I see that I'm running out of time. Let me pick it up in the next clip, inshallah. Okay, so hunting. It is permissible to hunt using all types of trained predatory land animals and predatory birds. Now, the conditions that we are going to list apply in the dominant position of the madhab, apply both to land animals and to birds. So this is another way that we can, bring the food to us and be able to consume it. Usually there's a dog involved. So let me just get that out of the way. So the dog, what the dog bites of the animal, that part is najis. So that part actually has to be washed 7 times, 1 time with dirt, or removed. But he says, right before I recorded, I was looking up the Minhaj and Shirbi's commentary on Minhaj and other people. They say that the most likely opinion is that it's not forgiven. So it almost makes me feel that there must be an opinion in the madhab that says it's ma'fuun anhu, but I did not find that. So because of the absolute strictness that we have on the najasa of the dog and the pig, that's the dominant position, and that's what I'm going to go with. That if the dog bites it and brings it, as is usually dogs are the animal that will be used in the hunting process, then you would have to wash that 7 times, 1 time with water, which I know it sounds involved, but it is what it is. Okay, it's permissible to hunt using all types of trained predatory land animals and predatory birds. So any type of animal that you could train and you could do the following things to, it would be permissible to use them to hunting. And there are 4 conditions for the animal being trained. When it goes, when it's sent, it goes. So you have like a sound or a word, or like that, some kind of indication that they're trained. That means they're going to go. Likewise, when you have a whistle or some kind of sound or something like that, when it's told to stop, it stops. So those are the key things. So some birds do that. I'm not an expert. I've never had any experience in this whatsoever. I'm completely giving you the academic version, the theoretical version of the fiqh. But you know, you see movies and things like that where there are hunting animals, and the animal, which is your implement, which is your instrument, has to be able to listen to you. And then number three, and this is very important, that if they kill the prey, they don't eat from it. If they kill the prey and they eat from it, you can't eat it. Well, I'll get to the exceptions in a second. And then it does the above repeatedly. So when we say that the animal is trained, it means that it's going to do it. It's like on demand, over and over and over and over again. It's going to do the same set of things. Now, if the animal loses one of these conditions and injures the animal that you're trying to hunt and brings you the animal and the animal's still alive, you can slaughter it and then that's okay. But if the animal doesn't do all of these four things, the hunting animal, and then kills the animal, then the animal was haram for us to eat. So the training part is a very, very important part of this process, and then therefore a whole industry would and does in fact exist on how to train animals. I know that much about it, and there are special types of dogs and birds and falcons and this and that. Like a lot of the Khaliji Arabs, they have like their falconers, they have the special glove, and they do like this, and the hawk comes, and I mean, I would be petrified if you ever see the talons of those. It's terrifying, but they're trained. MashaAllah, Subhanallah, Allah Taala has given us the ability to train these animals to do this thing. Is actually like a miraculous. I think it's like a miraculous thing. Anyway, so if one of the above conditions is missing, its prey is not permissible to eat unless it is still alive when the human takes it and is slaughtered. What I just said. So that's about the hunting. I actually don't think there's that much more to say about it. Let me look before I go to the next section quickly at the Hashia. As I said, it's a very simple discussion. There's really not that much going on here. Yeah. Okay. Okay, now the next section is about the implement. It is permissible to slaughter using any implement that draws blood except for teeth and fingernails. Now, the teeth and fingernails being excluded comes from a hadith which I want to give you. Okay, here it is. This is in the Sahihain. ما أنهر الدم وذكر اسم الله عليه فكلوا. That which draws blood, meaning the instrument, implement used to draw blood, and which Allah's name has been mentioned over, eat it. ليس السن والظفر, except the nails, the fingernails, and bones. Teeth, I mean, teeth and fingernails. I'm sorry. I'll say bone. I'll tell you why I said bones. It's fingernails and teeth. وَسَأُحَدِّثُكُمْ عَنْ ذَلِكَ. And the Prophet ﷺ said, and I'll explain to you why. So this is a very nice hadith because the illah is in the hadith. So when we think about usul al-fiqh, it's great. It's like any any mujtahid's dream. Thank you. Just tell me what the illah is. Amma sin, as for the teeth, fa'adham, it's a type of bone. Wa amma dhufr, as for the nails, it's something that is like kind of, barbaric. This is the hadith. Um, Now, as far as understanding this illah, some of our fuqaha, like Ibn Abd salam, say that it's ta'abudan, that we do this out of worship, that there is no rational explanation why those two are excluded. Some say, waqila, so a minority of position, so even though the illah is expressed in the hadith, we like the illah of the illah. Well, why then? Some will say, so that no blood becomes from the nails or from the teeth would get in, because there could be blood attached to them, get into the animal to make it najis. But that's a minor position. I mean, this is a very, very esoteric Usuli principle, but I wanted you to explain, I wanted you to understand why that there's a direct hadith about this. The Prophet ﷺ told us not to do it, told us well, the tooth is like a bone, and therefore we do it out of ta'abud. Anyway, it's pretty raw if you use the tooth or fingernail to kill an animal. So anything that's sharp, basically, any implement that's going to draw blood, but it's got to be. And I have seen, the people that do the slaughtering. I used to think it's just someone who comes around with like a big, like almost like mini sword, like knife, but they don't. They have different instruments. Some things that poke, some things that stretch. I mean, there's different types of instruments that they. Well, maybe that's more for the preparation, but from the slaughtering part, it usually is a knife, but it could be some type of other sharp instrument that is used. So there is some flexibility in that. However, the kamal, the full thing that we're looking for is that it's done with grace, it's done with tawfiq, it's done with ihsan. وإذا قتل إن الله كتب الإحسان على كل شيء. The Prophet ﷺ said Allah has prescribed ihsan, spiritual excellence upon everything. And in the hadith he said, وإذا قتلتم فأحسنوا القتل. If you وإذا ذبحتم فأحسنوا الذبح. If you're going to slaughter, then do the slaughter to the best. So this is something that's optimal, that needs to be done in an optimal way. And then he says, rahimahullah, that the beginning of the next section, animals slaughtered by all Muslims are permissible, Muslim men and women. So, and then he's going to get into the other faith traditions that we'll cover obviously in the next class. But obviously, any Muslim, a male or female, can, old or young, as long as they abide by what we've just mentioned, they can slaughter the animal, and then the meat of that animal would then be halal for us. I didn't get a chance to talk about modern implications. Maybe we can do that in another venue, but that's kind of the fiqh for now. We'll put a pin in it here. Wallahu ta'ala a'la wa a'lam wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Mawlana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Alhamdulillah, in today's lecture, we actually made a big dent, I would say, in the section of hunting and slaughtering. So we talked about the first scenario, the traditional textbook scenario, slaughtering an animal. You're able to hold the animal and you cut its throat and its esophagus, and the sunnah or the extra would be the two jugular veins. And then the second scenario is an animal that you can't do that to because it's incapacitated or there's distance or whatever. You're slaughtering it through injuring it, and it dies through that injury. And then number three, we talked about hunting, and we said that any predatory land animal or predatory bird animal can be used for hunting with those conditions that when you tell it to go, it goes. When you tell it to stop, it stops. It doesn't eat from the prey, and it does those three things repeatedly. So it's kind of on repeat. If they don't do all of those things and they incapacitate the animal that you're seeking to hunt, and the animal's not dead, you can slaughter it and then eat it. However, if they kill the animal and they've not done those conditions, then the animal is haram to eat. I forgot to mention something about shooting. Shooting would work in hunting as long as it just injures the animal, doesn't kill the animal. And maybe in tomorrow's lecture I'll remember to pick it up. And then we talked about the implement that can be used to slaughter. Anything basically that's sharp can be used as an implement except for teeth and fingernails. And we looked a little bit about that dalil, and how Al-Izz ibn Abd salam, rahimahullah, one of our great fuqaha, he just said, and a companion of Sidi Abu Hassan al-Shadili, I should mention, he's also known for that, is that it's out of ta'abbud. There's no rational reason why, but that hadith in Bukhari and Muslim state that the Prophet ﷺ forbade us from using those two, and we don't use them. And then we began talking about who it's permissible to provide the slaughtering. Of course, we begin by saying any Muslim, old or young, male or female, that slaughters an animal, then it is permissible for us to eat that animal. In the course of the lecture, in the slaughtering, we also talked about involuntary movement and voluntary movement of the animal that's being slaughtered as a type of vocabulary that you will find in this section of Islamic law. As inshallah you go on and do great things and expand your research in the subject, you will find those. So something to also be on the lookout for. والحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى اللهم على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.